15 strange car features that are now banned by law. Hey friends, welcome to our channel dedicated to retro and vintage automobiles. Today we're diving deep into a fascinating and somewhat disturbing world of automotive history. You know, there was a time when some things that seem absolutely insane and dangerous to us now were completely normal in cars. Manufacturers were even proud of these features. They advertised them. They boasted about them at exhibitions. But then, science, statistics, and common sense came along and reconsidered everything. And now these features are banned by law in most of the world. Why? Because they directly led to deaths and injuries. We're talking about cars that were more like death traps for their owners than reliable transportation. Let's figure out what horrors were hidden under the hoods and inside the cabins of legendary vehicles from the last century. We'll cover 15 of the strangest car features that are now forbidden. Ready? Let's go. 1. Rigid steel steering columns. The spear of death straight through the chest. Imagine this. 1955, a Chevrolet Bel Air, one of the most beautiful American cars of its time. But inside the cabin lurked a deadly trap. The steering column of this car was simply a straight steel rod running directly from the engine block into the interior. In a front-end collision, when the car suddenly stops, this column becomes a spear. It shoots straight through the driver's chest and abdomen with the force of impact that guarantees a penetrating wound. The same situation existed on the Ford Falcon, the Dodge Dart, and most automobiles of the 1950s and 1960s. Historians call this the driver's spear, a bit dark but honest. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA, spent decades collecting accident statistics and came to a horrifying conclusion. Rigid steering columns were killing thousands of people every year. In 1968, Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard, FMVSS 203, was introduced, which required steering columns to be energy-absorbing, meaning they should bend, break, and deform upon impact rather than impale the driver. Europe followed with similar requirements in the 1970s. The transition to these new, collapsible steering columns saved roughly 20,000 lives in just one decade. Impressive, right? 2. Single-circuit hydraulic brakes. One leak equals death on the road. The Volkswagen Beetle of the 1930s and 1940s, the Ford Model T of the 1920s. In these vehicles, the entire brake system operated on a single hydraulic line. This meant the entire braking mechanism depended on one master cylinder. If there was even a small leak, even a tiny crack in a hose, the entire system lost pressure and became completely non-functional. Picture this. You're driving a 1938 Beetle down the highway at 60 kilometers per hour. A brake line ruptures, and you suddenly discover that the brake pedal is soft and doesn't work. You're speeding toward oncoming traffic with no brakes at all. This wasn't a hypothesis. It was everyday reality on roads during the first half of the 20th century. NHTSA introduced Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard, FMVSS 105, in 1968, which required a dual-circuit braking system. The idea is simple. If you design the braking system with two independent circuits, front and rear or diagonal, and one circuit fails, you still have another one that can stop the car. On Soviet Ladas, this system was implemented later, around the 1970s. 3. Leaded gasoline. Poison in your tank and in the air. The Pontiac GTO of the 1960s, the Ford Mustang, the Plymouth Roadrunner, all these legends ran on leaded gasoline, more precisely, gasoline with tetraethyl lead additives. Why? Because these additives increased octane rating, prevented engine knock, and improved lubrication properties. For engineers, it was miracle fuel. All major oil companies sold it under different brand names, and every car made at that time was optimized for this leaded gasoline. But here's the problem. Lead is a toxic, heavy metal. The exhaust from cars running on leaded gasoline releases microscopic lead particles into the air. Children breathe in this lead, and it accumulates in their bodies. By the 1970s, the lead levels in the blood of American children were 100 times higher than safe limits. Research showed this led to IQ reductions of 4 to 7 points, behavioral problems, and increased adolescent crime. Some hypotheses suggest that lead in the air actually explains the wave of crime in 1980s America. The EPA, America's Environmental Protection Agency, began phasing lead out of gasoline in 1975 by requiring catalytic converters on new cars, and catalytic converters are incompatible with leaded gasoline. By 1986, lead was almost completely eliminated from American gasoline. Europe followed later, around the 2000s. The last country in the world to abandon leaded gasoline was Algeria in 2021. That's how long this poison circulated on our planet. 4. Asbestos brake pads. Cancer with every brake application. The classic Chrysler of the 1970s, General Motors vehicles, Ford, almost all cars used asbestos brake pads. Asbestos was the perfect brake material. It doesn't melt at high temperatures, lasts a long time, and has excellent friction properties. Manufacturers packed this material into brake pads by the ton, millions and millions of cars. Every time a mechanic changes the brake pads on an old car, they inhale asbestos dust. 20 to 30 years later, they develop mesothelioma, a cancer caused by inhaling asbestos fibers. It works like slow poisoning. Asbestos was officially recognized as a carcinogen back in the 1970s, but regulations came slowly. The EPA began a partial ban in the 1980s, and a complete ban on asbestos in brake pads was introduced by the 1990s. The EU banned asbestos for new braking systems in 1998. Today, brake pads use ceramic materials, organic compounds, or sintered metal mixtures. One era of asbestos brakes resulted in thousands of deaths among mechanics worldwide. 5. Sharp hood ornaments, pedestrian killers. The Rolls-Royce Phantom of the 1930s, Packard, Cadillac. These were luxury vehicles, and they were decorated proudly. Massive chrome-plated statues sat on hoods, sometimes 25 to 30 centimeters tall. Wings of victory, gods of speed, abstract figures made from precious metals. It looked impressive until you think about what happens when a car hits a pedestrian. This sharp statue becomes a spear that impales the pedestrian's body upon impact. Statistics showed that sharp hood ornaments doubled the severity of pedestrian injuries compared to smooth hoods. The United Nations and the European Commission on Safety introduced Global Technical Regulation, GTR, number 127, which banned protruding ornaments back in the 1970s. The United States followed with its own state laws starting in the 1960s. Today, if you buy a beautiful vintage car with a sharp ornament, you'll need to either remove it or replace it with a magnetic one that falls off upon impact. Beauty had to be sacrificed for safety. 6. Metal instrument dashboards, razors inside the cabin. Take a 1964 Ford Mustang, a Chevrolet Corvette, a VW Beetle. Opening the cabin door, you're greeted with a gleaming metal instrument panel with sharp edges, rigid buttons, and levers pointing directly at the driver's face. In a front-end collision, when the driver flies forward, their face, forehead, nose crashes directly into this icy metal wall. The result is cuts, skull fractures, blindness, permanent disfigurement. The classic 1964 Mustang was particularly notorious in this regard. Its massive metal panel, resembling armor plating, sent people to hospitals with horrific facial injuries. NHTSA introduced Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard, FMVSS 201, in 1968, which required padded dashboards, instrument panels covered with soft materials. This means plastic, foam, soft materials that absorb impact instead of amplifying it. On early Soviet VAZ 2101 models, they used a hard panel made from cardboard and compressed sawdust. But by the late 1970s, cars began using soft plastic panels. 7. Absence of headrests. Whiplash injuries guaranteed. The Dodge Dart of the 1960s, the Chevrolet Impala with bench seating, the Plymouth Fury. In these vehicles, the front seats had no headrests at all. The drivers' and passengers' necks just dangled in the air. In a rear-end collision, the head snaps backward while the body remains stationary thanks to the seatbelt. The result is a stretching of cervical vertebrae, whiplash injury, leading to chronic neck pain, loss of sensation, and in some cases, paralysis. NHTSA introduced Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard, FMVSS 202, in 1969, requiring mandatory headrests on all front seats. Minimum height, 33 inches, approximately 84 centimeters from the floor. Europe followed with a similar requirement in 1972. Modern headrests aren't just foam pieces. They're active systems with springs that activate upon impact, moving forward and upward to catch the head. The statistics are clear. Active headrests reduce the risk of serious whiplash injury by 40%. 8. Single-point seatbelts. Just a lap belt. American, British, and German cars of the 1950s often came with single-point seatbelts, essentially just a lap belt that held only the hips. The upper body, chest, and shoulders were completely unrestrained. In a side impact or rollover, the driver could be ejected through the side window or thrown sideways with enough force to break ribs. Even worse in a front-end collision. While the lower body was secured by the lap belt, the upper half would fly forward and smash into the dashboard. Saab in 1959 was the first to introduce the three-point seatbelt, an invention by Niels Bohlin, who previously designed ejection systems for fighter jets. The three-point belt, running diagonally across the shoulder and around the waist, distributed impact force across the entire torso rather than just the hips. After 1968, the three-point seatbelt became mandatory in the United States. This simple innovation saved millions of lives. Statistics show the three-point belt reduces mortality in frontal collisions by 45 to 50%. 9. Complete absence of airbags, bare metal, and hope. This isn't just forbidden, it's now physically impossible for new cars. Before the 1990s, there were no airbags at all. The first airbags started appearing in luxury German cars in the 1980s, but they were rare. Most vehicles from the 1970s and 1980s were just iron, metal, leather, plastic, and nothing else. In a front-end collision, the driver relied entirely on the seatbelt, and that's it. No cushioning whatsoever. In the United States, starting in 1999, airbags on the driver and passenger sides became mandatory for new cars. Today, a modern vehicle has 6 to 8 airbags, side impact airbags, frontal airbags, knee airbags, and curtain airbags. You can only disable them for special purposes. Old cars without airbags can still be driven if they comply with technical regulations from the time they were manufactured. 10. Open roadsters without doors and side protection, the Smart Crossblade. The Smart Crossblade of 2002. This was an experimental city car with a complete absence of doors and side protection. Imagine, you're driving this vehicle and around you is just wind. No side windows, no doors, nothing. In a side impact collision, there's virtually nothing protecting you. Such vehicles are banned in the United States, Europe, everywhere with any safety standards. The Lotus 340R is another example of an unprotected, minimalist sports car from the early 2000s, built with minimum weight and maximum vulnerability. Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, FMVSS 201 and FMVSS 206, dashboard impact and side protection, don't allow this. That's why even modern convertibles have strong safety frames and rollover protection bars. 11. No interior trunk lock, a trap on wheels. Before the early 2000s, many car trunks had no interior lock release. This meant if you accidentally, or maliciously, got trapped inside the trunk, you couldn't escape. You're sitting in complete darkness inside the trunk, and the only way out is to scream and wait for someone to open it from outside. This led to deaths. People, especially children, who were playing hide and seek and hid in the trunk, would become trapped. They would suffocate, freeze, become victims. Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard, FMVSS 401, requires that all trunks have an interior release mechanism, usually a glowing handle or lever that you can pull to free yourself. 12. Manual choke controls, dangerous technique of the past. Old carbureted engines had manual choke controls that looked like a simple lever on the instrument panel. The driver had to manually pull or push this lever to enrich the fuel-air mixture for cold starting. If you forgot to adjust this lever after the engine warmed up, you could end up with an extremely rich mixture that would cause the engine to overheat and catch fire. With the advent of electronic fuel injection, EFI, in the 1990s, manual choke controls disappeared. Now, the computer handles everything. It automatically knows what mixture to supply at different temperatures. 13. Rear and side-mounted gas tanks, explosive devices on wheels. The Ford Pinto of the 1970s became infamous because of its gas tank placement. The tank sat directly over the rear axle, and in a rear-end collision, especially at high speed, the tank would crumple and rupture. Gasoline would leak into an air intake located directly above the exhaust pipe. The result was a fire. After a collision, a Pinto would be burning within seconds. Ford knew about this problem, but according to company calculations, the cost of modifying the design, approximately $11 per car, was less than the expected litigation costs from future deaths. This is one of the most famous examples of corporate negligence in automotive history. After the scandal, NHTSA introduced Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard, FMVSS 301, which required protection for fuel tanks during collisions. Fuel tanks began to be placed in safer locations with buffer zones around them. Today, the fuel tank is a highly protected component of any automobile. 14. Neon and RGB lights on the exterior, disco on the road. This is a more recent example than classic 1950s and 1960s cars, but still worth mentioning. In the 1990s and 2000s, the fashion for neon tubes underneath the car body was huge. Glowing running boards, RGB strips around the perimeter, flashing lights. It looks cool on YouTube, but regulators don't like it. Why? Because colored lights, especially blue and red ones, can be mistaken by other drivers for police or emergency vehicle signals. Flashing lights are distracting and disorienting. Plus, they can be dangerous for people with epilepsy. In 9 U.S. states, Massachusetts, Illinois, Washington, Maine, Minnesota, Virginia, Connecticut, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, neon lights are completely banned. In other states, either specific colors are banned, blue and red, or only stationary white or yellow lights are permitted. This doesn't apply to main headlights and taillights. We're talking about aesthetic underglow lighting. 15. Sharp steering wheel protrusions, rim blow, and dangerous horn pads. The 1960s, Cadillac, Mercury, Chevrolet, steering wheels featured something called rim blow technology. The idea was that instead of a separate button in the center of the wheel, you'd simply squeeze the rim, and it would honk. Sounds logical. Your hand is already on the rim. Why make extra movements? But in reality, this led to situations where pressing the rim while turning would accidentally activate the horn. Drivers found themselves honking unintentionally. By 1971, this feature had disappeared. Plus, there's the problem with a central horn button in the steering wheel. In a front-end collision, a rigid horn pad can damage the driver's chest and abdomen. Today, steering wheels are manufactured with soft centers that absorb impact. The horn is activated either by buttons on the steering wheel spokes or touch-sensitive elements on the wheel rim. Conclusion: from the hell of yesterday to the safety of tomorrow. These 15 features are just the tip of the iceberg. Each one tells a story of how people suffered serious injuries, became disabled, and died. The history of automotive manufacturing is the story of negotiations between engineers who wanted to make cars safer and managers who wanted to save money. History shows that often safety wins, but it wins slowly, with blood and tears. A vintage automobile is a treasure of history, a work of art on wheels. But driving it without modifications on modern roads would be suicide. If you own a retro car, remember, replace the rigid steering column with a flexible one, install modern brakes, add headrests, install 3-point seat belts, and maybe even a couple of airbags if possible. Your life is worth more than the originality of the car's internals. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel. We have much more interesting content about retro cars coming. Write in the comments, have you seen any of these dangerous features in vintage cars you've owned? See you next time.